Hi there, I'm back. I'm ready to talk about animation, which is something I've been doing here for a while. Check out some of the old videos if you would like to. Hi, Kat. Because it's been taking me so long to actually put videos together and post them to this channel, I've been doing kind of bundles, kind of summaries of a bunch of different stuff that I've watched somewhat recently. I will have some more typical videos later on as well, I think. I'm planning to, but today it's the same deal. Bunch of stuff that I've seen recently and that I think warrants some kind of discussion. Most of these will be pretty brief reviews or impressions about the particular movie or show or whatever, but I'm hoping you get something out of them and that we can continue to talk about these particular IP, oh, such a gross term, that we can continue to talk about these works of art in the near future. And especially the last topic in this video, I think definitely warrants a whole bunch more discussion, conversation, etc. Okay, let's get started. The winner of Best Animated Feature for 2024, Flow, is a pretty good animated feature, in my opinion. This is an incredibly independent, incredibly European movie with zero dialogue. And honestly, I'm surprised a little bit that the whole no dialogue thing still gets people's attention, especially people who are familiar with animation. Like, animation was born in the silent film era, and given that it naturally thrives on visual storytelling, animated films without dialogue just kind of make sense, and we've had a lot of them. I guess the real feat here is pitching and selling a feature-length movie that's like that, and then actually executing it in a way where it manages to maintain the attention of the viewing audience. And I guess that's even more impressive when that viewing audience is likely to include a lot of children. So this is a movie about a cat going on an adventure with its animal friends in a post-human world. The driving force of the plot throughout the whole thing is rising water levels, and the messaging would appear to be all about the importance of adapting to changing circumstances and not resisting things unnecessarily. Go with the flow. Not too hard to land at that interpretation, right? It feels like kind of an agnostic spiritual mishmash that can also be interpreted a bunch of other ways thanks to that lack of dialogue and the emphasis on visual symbolism. Visually speaking, I don't think it's a stunning movie. It has a style, it looks good, and the animals are definitely well referenced, I think, both in terms of the animation, rigging, and also just sound design. A lot of the sound design is really great here. But the most impressive aspect of the animation is that, according to the credits, the whole movie was done in Blender. I've seen people talking online about, like, it's basically one guy. I never know how much to believe that. Obviously, there's a team here. It's as far as I know, it's really not just one person. And yeah, I mean, that's a huge boost at a time when open source modeling and animation software, of which Blender is basically the most famous at this point, are kind of on the up. People are getting really fed up with Adobe, Autodesk, Avid, the companies holding the keys to the kingdom and constantly increasing costs for independent artists. Maybe you've also seen that really great video on for-profit creative software that's really taking off. Anyway, really cool. This was made in Blender primarily, I guess, and I hope that it brings more people into the fold, and maybe makes animation feel a little bit more accessible to people, because it is, if you're willing to put in many hours learning a complicated program like Blender, which I haven't done yet because it's kind of rough. What else? It's an easy movie to recommend, I think, except to people who aren't so good with slow-paced stories. Now, does the Oscar win really matter here? Not for viewers, I don't think, but for filmmakers, an Oscar can definitely make an entire career. And since it looks like this movie had a pretty hard time getting funded, I really hope that the team finds it a lot easier to get their next project greenlit, regardless of whatever that ends up being. And in a more petty, competitive sense, It's always kind of fun to see Disney Pixar lose the award, especially in a year when they had a movie that reviewed really well. Alright, so originally I was going to do a full video on Sonic 3, but basically I don't feel that's necessary. There are enough people out there expressing a similar enough viewpoint to mine that I don't think there would be a lot of value in that. So I'm still going to talk about the movie, but only for a bit, and hopefully without getting too worked up. As a refresher, I don't like these movies. And that dislike doesn't have anything to do with the Sonic franchise itself. I like Sonic games when they're good, and there have been good Sonic shows, at least at times, but this whole trilogy of Paramount movies is deeply embarrassing to me. These are very obviously bad movies. They're not the kinds of movies where I can see how a certain audience would love them, but they're just not for me. These are bad. They are no good objectively. And the only value I see in them is using them as textbook examples of what bad animated studio movies look and sound like. This movie condescends to its audience. It has extremely low expectations for what its viewers will accept. And apparently those expectations have been completely accurate, because I'm pretty sure this movie made a lot of money and that a lot of fans are perfectly happy with it. Unfortunately, that condescension seeps into every major aspect of Sonic 3's filmmaking, starting with the casting. Keanu Reeves is capable of giving good performances. This isn't one of those. Keanu Reeves was not cast in Sonic 3 because he was right for the part or because he just wanted to get involved. He was cast because he is a box office pool that most people know, and a lot of people who aren't that into movies just think he's totally epic and super badass, and it ends there. Shadow is bad in this movie, as in not convincing in any way. He sounds like a celebrity in a recording booth reading lines from a script in his usual speaking voice. It's a performance so bad that it makes me appreciate Idris Elba as Knuckles a whole lot more, because at least there's some kind of effort going on there. It's an actor making creative decisions about how to play that role. That doesn't make the character of Knuckles good in these movies, but at least it's someone doing a job, and I can respect that. Everything else about this movie, from the story to the score to the attempted themes of like redemption and family, all of this stuff is low effort. And you would think that the fan base would want to see stories that in some way resemble the Sonic games, but none of these movies have captured that feel at all. All we get is the characters, and even then, I feel that they're incredibly shallow and stilted. But if I say that those qualities are accurate to how the characters are portrayed in the games, I'm pretty sure Sonic fans would take that as an insult. So what is it? Like, why do the Sonic fans keep going to these movies? Why are online discussions of Sonic 3 so positive? What am I not seeing here that makes Sonic 3 not just tolerable, but actually worthy of some kind of praise? I admit it's possible that the success of this particular series of movies has been driven mainly by like the kids and families who aren't particularly into the franchise, they just want something fun and easy to watch. In fact, that's the most likely scenario, I think. And there have always been dumb kids movies. That's not new. It's not something new at all. But the consistently frustrating thing about a dumb kids movie being financially successful is that it perpetuates that subgenre, if we can call it that. It's millions of people communicating to a studio that just totally brain dead, low effort movies with painfully out of touch attempts at comedy are a-okay. That is the message that gets taken from something like this, regardless of any nuances that are influencing the reasons people go to see the movie. It's a movie that creates problems, and I don't think that's really what we need right now. On a dramatically different note, I watched a very good movie that translates clumsily as Night is Short, Walk On Girl. Not a great title in English. It's one of those titles that shows up in the movie as a line of spoken dialogue. I get it, but I still think they could have chosen something better for the English release, whatever. Anyway, I think that this has become one of the more well-known movies directed by Masaki Yuasa, whose work I've liked for a while now. He was involved with, but did not direct Cat Soup, a short that was my entry point, and I really, really love that one. Later on, I saw Kick Heart. That was kick-started, I think. I saw Lou Over the Wall, a tiny bit of Devilman Crybaby, which didn't really click with me, and I saw that episode of Adventure Time that he storyboarded. I don't think that my affection for his movies is too hard to explain. He's got a very distinctive illustration and animation style, and it translates well to animated features. You know, it just works. Now, where I start to lose some of my interest is in the actual storylines of the movies that he usually directs, and that definitely applies to this movie as well. So Night is Short can be summarized as a coming-of-age story about a young college-aged girl, I think, college-aged girl, who just has this single night full of goofy, whimsical adventures. It breaks down more or less into 3 little vignettes, so that offers a lot of variety inherently, which is good, but the connective tissue is generally weak, which is bad. I also think we can put the movie into the very broad category of surrealism, since it tends to have things happen just because it wants those things to happen, and because those things are often disconnected from reality. So for me, the result is a very floaty, art housey, or maybe even art schooly narrative that doesn't offer the kind of gripping intrigue or emotional impact that you might get from a much more typical film structure. But at the same time, I've tried to be a big proponent of non-traditional narrative structures and stories that are not limited to the confines of the boring real world, especially in animation. So obviously there's still a lot here that I appreciate. And in terms of revisiting the movie, I expect that I'll be doing that like one short clip at a time, because that's what I admire the most, is these very particular images or sequences that don't last very long, but that are also very, very good. I'm not so concerned with the plot or sticking it out through every single scene, and I think that very specific strength of the movie that I just talked about has been proven to some extent by the online discussion surrounding it. This movie makes for really great thumbnails, really great GIFs. It serves up so many fantastic images that I think those images alone are enough reason to watch. A long time ago, I promised to revisit The Boy and the Heron in an attempt to document any potential changes to my feelings about the movie. And any person's view of any particular movie is going to change. That is inevitable. It doesn't always mean that you're going to do a 180 on a movie, but there are always going to be differences in how you feel about it. But above and beyond that norm, I knew that I was going to view this movie differently, mostly because my first viewing in the theater left me kind of confused. I needed more time to process the whole thing, and I didn't do that processing before making that first video. So that's the background. I recently rewatched the movie, probably my 3rd viewing overall, and what do you know, my feelings about the movie have changed. But first up, what hasn't changed? Well, my appreciation for the craft of The Boy and the Heron has not changed. On a technical level, it is very impressive, and I still maintain that the color palettes throughout and like the shading of the movie, the overall contrast, are really, really nice. Just any given screenshot could easily be identified as coming from this movie, I think, as opposed to a different Ghibli movie. And the animation obviously is excellent. I don't think Studio Ghibli is lacking in praise on that front. There are great keys, great shot choices, and the motion, despite often being very understated and kind of evenly animated, it still looks great. That is one of the Ghibli signatures. I think it's impactful without being too flashy most of the time. So what has changed? Well, most notably, I feel more confident about my assessment of the movie's overall quality and its standing in relation to the Ghibli back catalog. At best, this is a mediocre Ghibli movie, which means that in comparison to all animated movies, it's slightly above average. It makes me think of some of my earliest experiences with Ghibli movies. I didn't really grow up with any of them, by the way. I was probably in my mid-teens when I saw Spirited Away for the first time, and I will openly admit that I just did not get it. I knew it was a famous movie, but it didn't click with me at all. I enjoyed and remembered certain images by the time that it was over, but the story was just kind of a mess. Characters were introduced very casually, even late into the third act, and characters would frequently change. Either their personalities would change, their roles would change, or my perception of them as a viewer would change, all very quickly. Now, having grown up almost exclusively with American animation, I am guessing that I blamed my negative impressions on the fact that it was a foreign film and that I just didn't understand these choices, which were probably considered normal in a different part of the world. Now, of course, in hindsight, I was almost entirely wrong about every aspect of Spirited Away, but despite that, the movie stayed with me, and later on I came to appreciate just how singular and impeccable that movie really is. Now, in contrast, The Boy and the Heron is not a movie that has stuck with me. I don't find myself randomly thinking about it or having the urge to watch it. In fact, this recent rewatch was just because I was showing it to a friend. Imagery, I think, is part of that lack of stickiness, but it's also about emotional resonance, or maybe lack thereof. There are tiny little moments that sort of hit on an emotional level. You know, subtlety is great, but I feel like The Boy and the Heron is overly reliant on your background as a viewer to elicit feelings. So, for example, this is a movie about a little boy who's lost his mom, and he's going on a grand adventure to find his stepmother, but also kind of his real mother. And he finds both of them, except that his real mother is a younger version of herself who has to actively make the choice to proceed with her life and have her son, even knowing that she's going to die pretty soon after that. Now, that sounds incredibly dramatic, incredibly emotional, and like I said, there are bits and pieces where the movie does make me feel something, but the movie takes a very hands-off approach, kind of like it's saying, okay, well, you have a mom, or a parent, or a guardian. You feel things about them. Now feel those things. Here's a dead mom story. Feel some things about it. I think that if you were to surgically remove the middle chunk of this movie, you would have no idea what the protagonist's goal is. It would just be some kind of generic adventure. The plot is not infused with a sense of what the main character wants or where he comes from. He's just a straight-faced little boy who is doing a thing because he has to do it. This doesn't mean the characters are bad. I still like most of them, and come to think of it, someone just doing a thing because they have to do it is very realistic. That's how I've lived much of my life. It's just not enough. And while it's kind of fun to try and explain that lack of impact from an intellectual perspective, I think the most important factor is your own intuitive response to the movie. And my response to this movie, through multiple watches now, has been that it doesn't really reach me. The central premise is really evocative, and there are plenty of other smaller ideas briefly touched on that I also think are creatively stimulating. As I talked about in my previous video, there's a lot of third act material that seems to be commenting on the value and nature of creation, and maybe also artistic creation, but it ends up just feeling like a hollow reason for a climax to happen and to get our characters back to the real world. And so, despite the inclusion of many different elements that should, in theory, rip our hearts out, I think it ends up being a fairly hollow experience that's pretty to look at, but thin as washi paper on the story side. If you're into animation, chances are pretty good that you have already seen or at least heard of a new animatic pilot called Pretty Pretty Please, I Don't Want to Be a Magical Girl, which I'll probably just call Magical Girl from here on out. But honestly, this isn't really going to be a review of the pilot. I mean, for one, it's just an animatic, so it's tough to get a sense for the animation overall, except for that one portion towards the end that seems to be fully animated, basically as a sample or a teaser, I guess. If you're wondering what I think of this specific animatic, I think it's great. I really like it. The character design is excellent. The premise is cute, certainly substantial enough to serve as the basis for a Cartoon Network style show. And obviously there's plenty of room for commentary given our characters and given the specific mention of the magical girl concept. I think it's just over 3 million views now, which feels like a guarantee that it's going to get picked up somewhere by somebody for production. Or at the very least, I think the creator has a great shot of getting a new job, even if they already work in the industry. But the real reason for bringing this up is that it is a clear continuation of what we've been seeing for a couple of years now, which is posting to social media, YouTube specifically, being like a really genuinely great way to pitch your animated series. If you manage to get tons of views, then potential investors or distributors, etc., know that there's less risk. Like, it basically already has an audience. The idea has been proven. Now, the most popular pilots have obviously kind of hogged the spotlight, namely stuff like Hazbin Hotel, Amazing Digital Circus, and I guess Lackadaisy. Oh, and Puppy Cat, that's a huge one. That was a while ago at this point. There are a lot more of them, though, that you kind of have to look for. And I think that's worth mentioning because it confirms that not just any idea is going to go viral. And I'm not saying that the most successful YouTube-launched animation series are the best of the bunch. I happen to hate Amazing Digital Circus, but it also probably has the most views of anything I've mentioned here. So I think the next big question is whether this is a good thing. Is this good for animation as a whole? For now, I'm going to call it a net positive. I don't think it's the ultimate example of merit-based success that we might be tempted to see it as. I think it's far better than traditional means of pitching and the existing paths to getting something greenlit, and that's really great. But at the same time, I've been clear about what I see as some of the major weaknesses of how YouTube's algorithms recommend and promote videos, and I know that I'm not alone in those feelings. And there are similar issues with collective taste in animation, meaning mainstream tastes tend to follow certain trends and morph very slowly over time. Most of the time, people like to see something similar to stuff that they already like. And so pilots and shorts that appeal to current tastes most effectively are going to be more successful, which just sort of naturally discourages work that does not align with those current tastes. That's not a malicious thing on anybody's part. It's just a product of how groupthink interacts with computer models that prioritize stuff that's already successful. And I think this viewpoint is supported by the track record of which pilots have gotten the most attention. Hazbin feels visually very much like an evolution of like the hyper angular animation styles that were popular when I was a kid, and it contains more adult subject matter, making it align well with an adult audience that likely grew up with similar styles of animation. Magical Girl looks very, very, very much like a modern day Cartoon Network show in its character designs, color choices, and overall art direction. And while Amazing Digital Circus doesn't really line up with broadcast animation, it definitely fits in with the kind of webcore CG that has been popular online for a long time now, sort of as a spin-off of Vaporwave. None of these comments take away from the success of the heavy hitters in this space, and regardless of my personal taste, I am glad that all of them get to exist and that they've found their audiences. I just wanted to take note of some of the factors that contribute to overnight YouTube animation success. I'm looking forward to more Magical Girl, and I'm looking forward to more independent shows finding their footing online. And I'm always going to root for work that is more than willing to take chances. Okay, that's it for the current animation roundup. things I've been checking out recently. Thank you so much for sticking it out till the very end. As always, I'll try to be back as soon as I can with a new video. In the meantime, there's quite a back catalog here on this channel, a lot of stuff that has not been heavily promoted by YouTube or myself, so there's a lot more to dig through if you happen to like the way that I talk about animation and other types of entertainment. That's all. Have a good one. Thanks for stopping by.